But let's get started. After a really long, hard day at work, how many of you go home and to relax, to learn, for entertainment, or just for enjoyment, do you read? Most all of us, right? How many of you, after a long, hard day at work, go home and to relax, for entertainment, for enjoyment, or just for pleasure, you write? Yeah. I usually get a couple hands, and when I ask, there are people like Steve who love writing professionally, and there are people who love to do blogs or poetry or something, but the majority of us don't write for pleasure. Now, I write for a living, but I don't enjoy writing. I enjoy having written. I enjoy being done. And I know I stole that from somebody, but I don't remember who. All right. One of the main points here that I really want us to all think about, a takeaway, is that we have treated reading and writing as if they are two parallel. They are not. They share common ground, but they demand different strategies, skills, and abilities. One can enhance the other, but learning to read does not make you a writer, and learning to write does not make you a reader, all by itself. Skilled writing is incredibly complex. These days, I think of it a lot like directing an orchestra. Before the orchestra can all play together, you've got to tune up this section and tune up that section and make sure everybody's with you, and then everyone has to pay attention, and then all those pieces have to work together. This is one of those slides with a lot of information on it, and I have no intention of reading it to you. But you can see how much is going on during writing. Now, we know in the States, and I did not find comparable data in Australia, but some of you may be able to tell me, we know in the States from multiple surveys of teachers, and we are engaging in a potential survey here that we're very excited about that will include writing. U.S. teachers are very poorly prepared to teach writing. At the elementary level, they typically get at the most one day or one session in a reading course. The large majority of universities don't teach a course on how to teach writing. And by the time our kids are in upper elementary or middle school, that we quit teaching writing. It's expected that they know how. There may be an English language arts teacher in high school to try to help boost skills up to a better, higher level, but often those teachers are overloaded with remedial writing instruction, and they're really not teaching kids to boost. Our high school teachers in the U.S. don't know how to teach writing. Our teachers in the U.S. from elementary through high school report that this is the area they feel the least prepared in. And of course, our elementary teachers have to teach it all, right? And they put writing at the bottom. So therefore, are we surprised that in the States at least, teachers who have low self-efficacy for teaching writing also have low efficacy for writing themselves? And when something has to go in the classroom, what is it? Writing. So that's where they spend the least time. We have to think about writing as not just a skill or a bunch of strategies. It's a process, it's a product, it's a way of knowing, it's a way of learning. As Claire said, it's a way of being. It's a way of engaging in our culture and our society. Even for skilled writers, writing is not easy. Let's look at what a couple of our leading writers across time have said. Writing is the mental equivalent of digging ditches. Okay? Writing is simple. This was a sports reporter. Just sit down at the typewriter and open a vein. Okay, I feel that way at the keyboard quite often. Writing is no trouble. Just jot down ideas as they occur to you. The jotting is the simplicity itself. It is the occurring, which is difficult. And one of my favorite, every sentence is like pangs of birth. I don't know how he would know, but I really like the sentiment a lot. All right, a few things about skilled writers. We have studied them. I'm using the very royal we here, meaning the field of education, not me and Steve. A lot of people have studied skilled writers. Again, I'm not going to read this to you. You can peruse it quickly while I point out a couple of key things. Skilled writers are flexible and adaptable, but they're able to be flexible and adaptable because they have a wealth of knowledge about genre. They have a wealth of knowledge about basic writing attributes, how to reach a reader, how to use language effectively. These things work across genres. They have a wealth of self-regulation procedures they use to keep writing. We don't like doing it a lot, do we? But you all do some of it for your work, and you make yourself get done. Just like in the days when I was lesson planning and I really wanted to be done lesson planning, and I was like, if I just get this lesson plan done, I can have a glass of wine, right? We use all sorts of self-regulation procedures. Now that last one can't be too complicated. You heard the name of what we do is called self-regulated strategy development. Really now, 30-something years later, we've been doing research on this since 1980. I kind of look at the name and go, well, we've changed it 4 times. It's still not jazzy, but I'm not changing it again. It's the best I can do to attempt to communicate to you that we're teaching both writing strategies and the development of self-regulation. So what does self-regulation of writing require? Once again, we know. We have people like Barry Zimmerman and other leading researchers and people here in Australia doing work in the area of genre studies, doing work in the teaching of English, and we know that it looks at least like this. You have to know a lot about yourself as a writer. Where do you write best? What's easiest for you? What's hardest for you? What are you not good at? How will you get support on that? You have to know a great deal about how to analyze the writing task. Again, you peruse it. It'll be there if you want all the details later. Then you have to manage all that knowledge. Now the orchestra's just tuning up. Wow. And plus that, it gets harder with every grade. What you're able to do at 3rd grade in writing and do well will no longer serve you at 6th grade, which will no longer serve you in high school. And we're not supporting our students adequately to meet this challenge. Okay, part of the fun of studying writing is collecting writing. Some of these are ours, some are from a guy named Richard Lederer, some are from teachers. Only a couple. I could go on and on, but we need to have a little fun too. Homer also wrote The Odyssey, in which Penelope was the last hardship that Ulysses endured on his journey. Are we thinking about sense making? Are we thinking about what the reader will take away? Socrates was a famous Greek teacher who went around giving people advice. They killed him. This same class produced the title for today's presentation, Socrates died from an overdose of wedlock. The student didn't know what the poison was, so just substituted wedlock. Bach was the most famous composer in the world, and so was Handel. Handel was half German, half Italian, and half English. Wait for it, he was very large. All those hats. And one of my last favorites, Milton wrote Paradise Lost, then his wife died, and he wrote Paradise Regained. There is very little audience monitoring going on here. There is very little sense monitoring going on here. There's very little sense of linear message going on in most of these. There's very little self-assessment. We need to teach all of that. So how are we doing? Research indicates that most 5 to 18-year-old students in multiple countries across the world need a lot more support. And Australia and the US look a lot alike. How are we doing in Australia? I'm sorry if the red doesn't show real well. I'll get over here where I can read it a little bit better. I have been studying your writing data for the last couple of years since coming on board the LSI. And from 2011 to 2015, your test switched from a narrative writing test to a persuasive. That is in line with what's happening across a lot of the world, in line with the incredibly strong focus coming to bear on persuasive writing. For better or worse, and not with quite enough evidence base yet, but with some evidence, it is believed as to be one of the more powerful forms of writing for learning. But informative writing is also very powerful, and narrative biography can be very powerful. So we don't really have evidence that this one's more powerful, but it does seem to be the one that's been taught the least, and that people are coalescing around right now. In the US, we have the 3 big genres we're expected to teach: persuasive, narrative, and informative. Your CEO of ACARA said that 2015 NAPLAN results show that at a national level we're seeing little change in achievement in these important areas of learning. Year 3 saw a statistically significant increase in writing from year 2014, but year 7 and 9 had a statistically significant decrease from 2011, and I know that worries a lot of people in this room. Australia is part of the PISA, this assessment of 15 to 16-year-olds. It measures literacy broadly, again, preaching to the choir, so let's just get to the bottom line here. Students in Australia and the US are not doing all that well. Now, they are achieving above the world norm, the world mean, but we can do a lot better than that. 9 countries scored significantly higher than Australia. The US scored lower than Australia in writing. The difference between Shanghai and Australia's scores is equal to a year and a half of schooling. That's not okay. We know some of why now. We know teachers aren't well prepared. I know only from conversations here in Australia that appears to be true here, but we hope to get more data about that. We know that it's very hard to do, and a lot of teachers don't feel they write well, and we know that it's very hard to teach and very complex. How are we doing in the US? 2 out of 3 students don't score at the proficient level on our national assessment, the NAEP, at grades 4, 8, and 12. The NAEP data, like your data, shows that we have stayed stagnant in writing. We're not making progress for like over a decade. We're just staying flat. Gary.
Is NAEP a sample or census testing regime?
National Assessment of Educational Progress, and it is sampled across the country, yes, and then different students take different parts of the test. No student takes the entire test. So it's a large national, and it's become our leading data for watching what we're doing. And I think that would make it somewhat similar to your NAPLAN, right? The class of, let's hit this. As I am hearing in Australia, students with disabilities and English language learners score even worse than everyone else. And this has become a real concern. Reading and writing, the bigger picture of literacy, and math, of course, in the population of students who are struggling the worst. The class of 2012 in the US, the high school class of 2012, attained the lowest average score on our Scholastic Achievement Test, which is what you get into college with, since the assessment was introduced in 2006. We're going down. $2 billion is spent each year on remedial courses for post-secondary students. When I was a teacher in the 70s, and then when I became a professor in 1980, it was almost unheard of to have a remedial writing program in a 4-year university. In the United States, there is one in every single 4-year university now. We're not doing something right. And of course, business is spending a ton of money. So does it matter? Now, this is really preaching to the choir, so let me flash it right past you and it'll be here if you want it back. Clearly, writing has a lot to do with learning and showing what you know. I just want to focus on the middle one. In elementary, middle, and high school, according to research in the States, the 2 most powerful predictors of academic success are blank and reading comprehension. What do you think would go in that blank? But given that I'm here, what do you suppose does go in that blank? A lot of people want to put math there, but it is writing. It does matter. More than 90% of white-collar and 80% of blue-collar workers' jobs involve writing. This is not just true in the US. There are people who have looked at this across the European, Australia, across a lot of the world, and this is becoming true everywhere. High-level literacy skills are required now for most blue-collar jobs. An average level of literacy skill is higher now for entry-level jobs than it was just 10 years ago, and this trend is accelerating across the world, and a lack of competence in writing puts students at risk for school failure, and the consequences extend well beyond the school years. Now, in writing instruction, I think it's important to take a moment and talk about what we support. We're here, we have to share with you one evidence-based practice, one. It is not a panacea, it is not a silver bullet, and it is not a complete writing curriculum. Those things are so important that they'll show up on a slide, but I want to get it out there now. It's one piece of a complex puzzle, but it's a piece that appears to be generalizing across countries and to be helping improve instruction in a number of countries at this point, which is why I'm really excited to share it here. We agree with so much of what has happened in the last 20 years internationally in the focus on teaching writing. It's not all sit alone, write by yourself, and it's not get your paperback covered with red ink. Some red ink is well deserved, but how much and when is important. But it is about interactive learning to write and to read, and the two happening together. It is about the meaning of writing. It is about student selection some of the time. It is about creation of a writing community. It's about integrating writing with curriculum. It is about knowledge, skills, strategies, and mechanics. We can't ignore them, and they don't develop by themselves. Learning to read does not give you these skills for writing. Writing is developmental. It develops across your life. I'm still learning. If you take a job that demands writing from you, you will never stop getting a little bit better. If you go into a job where you have to write a little bit, you're probably still going to need a little bit of support on how to write better memos, how to write better quarterly reports, but you ought to be able to produce a decent one the day you take the job. And most young people today are not. In writing instruction, however, we do have the data to say this now. And Steve and others have been part of several teams that have collected this data and done these meta-analyses. Writer's Workshop, Whole Language, Process Approach, they do differ. I'm putting them together in one glob. I know better than that. I know there are nuances, but across them, they are very small effect size on children's writing. And in the US, that has been the predominant approach in almost all the schools we've worked in, and those schools have been extremely disappointed. And they have done millions of dollars in professional development. Their teachers are fully bought in. They're doing it well, and they're not getting much. For struggling writers, there's no impact. Teaching grammar in isolation is also not very effective. It can be effective, as meta-analyses that Steve and others have been involved in show, if it's weaved in, but spending hours and hours on grammar drill and practice will not make most people better writers. All right, one last argument. I'm so tired of hearing how we learn to talk naturally, and if we just give kids the time and the space and the experiences, we'll learn to write and read naturally as well. Well, I want to just make a quick counter argument. I've already said the bottom, so I'm just going to ask you this. We have a baby coming soon here, and I'm sure many of you in the room, how many of you have interacted with an infant, a toddler? Yes, everybody, right? Watched other people do it? Total strangers coo and make sounds so babies will imitate. Everyone in the extended family, neighbors and friends, says words and tries to get the baby to say it back. Mom and dad spend hours competing for mama versus dada. Well, mama's doomed because it's a whole lot harder to articulate. It's always dada. We go to great lengths. There is probably no more scaffolded learning experience in your entire life than learning to talk. So the next time someone tries to tell you it's natural, say yes, as long as you live in a community where it is intensely scaffolded. Community matters. The work of Barbara Rogoff, the work of so many other excellent social cultural researchers in teaching and learning. Community matters. And we are a community that can make a difference in how our children learn to write. Given our analysis of what writing demands, it's got affective demands. You know, I don't like it, I'd like to quit. It requires tolerance for frustration, it requires persistence. It's got cognitive and metacognitive demands, and it's got behavioral demands. Given all of those demands, in 1980, what I set out to do was work across theories. I'm a theoretical, I can't even say it. I'm a theoretical integrationist, and I'm still sane. But I was told in the 80s you can't pick from different theories what's been learned. You have to pick a theory and work from it. And I'm like, oh no, I'm a teacher and I'm an instructional researcher and I'm more like an engineer than a theorist, and I will do what I please. And I will study all these theories and I will pick what we have learned and I will try to put it together. Now, it's taken a lot of fine-tuning and iteration over the years, thus 4 names. But the way it looks today is pretty consistent for the last decade. But what a lot of current research is showing us is a better understanding of why it works and how it works. So we are deliberately going to teach explicitly, in fun, interactive, discourse-based ways. We're going to explicitly teach strategies generally for writing and genre-based strategies. We're going to teach strategies for the self-regulation of the writing process, and we are deliberately going to talk about and address and scaffold the development of motivation for writing, the development of adaptive attributions. Oh, I was really having trouble writing. I didn't get it. But there are 2 reasons I can do better. 1, someone's going to teach me powerful strategies and tricks. With the little kids, we call them tricks. And 2, I'm going to try hard. It doesn't work unless I try hard. And you'll see a little bit from kids about this. And then that leads to children feeling much more self-efficacious about their ability as writers, and research has shown this to be true. The database, at the end, there are references to the database, the meta-analyses. There are over 100 studies now in over 10 countries. It significantly changes how students write. It significantly changes what students write. It significantly positively affects efficacy, attitudes, and attributions. We get short-term maintenance, but like anything children learn, long-term maintenance could require a little bit of a booster session. Generalization. We hear a lot of people saying, nothing we teach kids generalize. Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Lots and lots of studies. If I teach a child to write good narrative, they'll be much better at story writing if they know how to do personal narrative. If I teach story writing, their personal narrative will get. If generalization is to a reasonably nearby genre, kids will do it. But the genres are independent to a great degree, and research is very clear. You can be a good story writer and a lousy persuasive writer, and on and on and on. You must teach each genre. Teaching one does not create writers who are equally competent in the others. Effect sizes, I'm going to do this really quickly, but this is the part where I really try to convince you that it's worth your time to be here today. So they're big. This is post-SRSD instruction compared to control. 28 experimental studies, effect size 1.75 in quality, moves kids 96 to the 96th percentile elements, 18 from the 50th, sorry, to the, I always go too fast here. 2.24 effect size, length 0.47. Length is not a goal in initial SRSD instruction. So it's really not surprising kids don't write more, because first of all, we just want them to write better. And then we begin to work on length once they're, and you'll see some in a minute. In maintenance, you can skim them. Quality, effect 1.3, elements 1.4, length, nope. Generalization 1.1, 1.5, 0.46. I'm sorry, yes, thank you. And I'm happy to take questions while we go as well. I'm trying to leave time at the end, but you do not have to wait. Elements refers to the elements of that genre. And of course, most of you know what that means, and we'll look at some of them in a minute. And it differs depending, of course, on the genre base. Are we looking at narrative? Are we looking at persuasive? Are we looking at expository? Your NAPLAN, year 3, ages 8, 9. The persuasive writing question, I think this is 2012. It read like this. Rules and laws tell us what we can and cannot do. Choose a rule or law that you think needs to change. This could be a home or school rule. It could be a rule of a game or sport. It could be a law that everyone has to follow. A change should make the rule or law better. Now, that's a lot to digest for an 8 or 9-year-old. One of the first things we teach in persuasive writing to a prompt is how to pull apart the prompt, and I'm sure many of your teachers do as well. Write to convince a reader why this rule or law should be challenged. Now, your teachers across the country, your leadership across the country, ask the question, is this even a reasonable task for 8 to 9-year-olds? I agree. When we started asking for much more developed, this is really an opinion essay, and I do want to define that. Don't let me forget to come back to that. Will you tell me in like 60 seconds? Okay. If we're going to ask for this kind of thinking and a reasonably structured and persuasive, although it's an opinion essay at this point, if we're going to ask for that, that's a lot. These kids are 8, right? Okay, well, this is very similar to what the Common Core began demanding students do in the United States, and I can show you that they can. Define, right? Thank you. Let's define quickly, and the definitions are slippery, and in the US, the Common Core has exacerbated our definitional problem. In general, for today, I'm going to say this. An opinion essay comes out of your head. You think about it, you reflect on it. You might know some things you think are facts, but you don't access any sources. You tell what you believe and why you believe it, and you try to convince the reader, and it's mostly from your head. Persuasive writing, argumentative writing. There are all kinds of slippery slopes in here in the Common Core in the US. Once you are using credible source, text, informational usually, or video, then you are writing persuasively because you are incorporating facts from credible sources. And we call that persuasive essays. We didn't used to, so it causes a lot of confusion. Then argumentative writing can occur at a couple of levels. Argumentative writing isn't just accessing facts and accessing credible source, pulling out what you need, making a powerful argument out of it. It is also rebutting at least one opposing position. Now, argumentative writing gets quite sophisticated. We'll take a real quick look at what we do at the high school level with argumentative writing and what's worked really well, but we're going to focus mostly today on the younger grades because of the time we have. All right, let's look at an early study in what I would call opinion essay writing with a second grader, a typical age 2. That is a typo. It's age 7. We will fix that.
We're very advanced in the U.S.
Yeah, really. You know, I fiddled with this till the last minute, and I missed that I did that. Age 7. So we asked, should parents give their children money for having good grades on their report cards? This is a typical second grader in the U.S. No, because parents aren't supposed to give money for their report cards and their grades. A clear opinion, but just because you're not supposed to. We don't see some of the other elements. We don't see at least maybe 3 or more compelling reasons, a little detail about each reason. We don't get much of a wrap-up. This is the same student post-SRSD instruction, which took 12, 30-minute or so lessons. And first of all, we learned to quit asking yes/no questions. We don't ask it that way anymore because they always want to answer yes or no, even after we tell them not to. So we now ask, think about whether or not the student, okay. But this was back a while. Yes, I think teachers should give students grades. First, kids need it so they can see if they got 100. Second, it would be much more easy if you give students a grade. We need to work on that a little bit. Finally, teachers would be proud of themselves if they give kids a grade. That's why teachers should give students grades. The end, I have all my parts. Now, I don't share this one because it's exemplary. It's not. Put on your teaching hat. Do we have a ways to go? But have we gotten on a playing field? Of course, this is 12 lessons. She's written 4 or 5 times collaboratively in her writing community with a lot of teacher guidance. This is totally independent. Now I've got somewhere more to go. I get all excited when I put on my instruction hat, but we don't have a lot of research to create the paths for instruction. Most of the research on SRSD is beginning point outcomes, and we just have a lot of talk, and I'll give you a couple websites, and a lot of thinking on where to go next, and teachers who are doing it, but we don't have empirical evidence from those teachers. Let's look at a 4th grader, age 9. Got that one right. This is a student with learning disabilities. She received whole class SRSD instruction from her general ed teacher with support in the classroom to all students from the special ed teacher. Now look at this. Does this remind you of your kids? Should kids have to go outside for recess? No, because kids need to be inside in storms and icky wet weather. Also to stay warm and cozy, yes, because it might be really hot. Also, it might not be too cold. We don't even have an opinion here. We have everything. Whole class SRSD, breaking up in small groups as needed to practice. 2 teachers working with about 30 kids, about 12 to 14 lessons later, written totally independently. Listen up. Now, I was impressed. I was there. This instruction was videoed, and you can find the video in the references at the end. And it used to cost about $300. It's gone down to $49.99 as of last week. So if you want it as a tool, it's now accessible. We have no royalties. We make nothing from it, but we help them set up and create the video. That did not come up. I'm thinking home, at home, Mom, Dad, listen up. And she thought, that gets attention. One of the things we teach is what it means to